This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers Cable or Rogers TV.
Hello, and thank you for joining Age-Friendly Caledon Conversations, a segment series where we talk about services and supports connected with Age-Friendly Caledon. I'm your host, Ken Weber, and today our guest is Danielle Farrell of the Public Education the Public Education Coordinator for the Alzheimer's Society of Peel. Today our topic will be memory loss versus dementia, and I'm certain every senior seeing this is going to be concerned with this topic, Danielle. You are Public Education Coordinator, so if I may begin our education with you, I'm going to recite a scenario that is very common among seniors. If you put a group of seniors together, after they've talked about the aches and pains, that's mandatory, the first of two things that happen is someone will say, you know, I go upstairs and I get to the bedroom and I forget why I got there, or I go to the basement and I say to myself, why am I here? And then the second thing that happened, every other senior will say exactly the same thing. I do that too.
Yeah.
So tell me, when does this stop being funny and when does it become something we should worry about?
Okay, it's a great question. We call those seniors moments. They are a normal part of aging, and we are all going to do it, I guarantee it. We're going to go stand in front of the fridge and think, I came here for something, what was it? And then we're going to close the fridge, go back to wherever we first had the thought, and then it's going to be there, and we're going to go back. So that's a normal part of aging, and the brain does experience wear and tear and some normal aging. Right? So some differences are normal.
So I shouldn't be too worried about that.
Not that,
okay.
No. And finding the right words sometimes slows down as you get a little older. Like you may find that you're trying to word find and the right word is on the tip of your tongue. And then, you know, it comes to you later when you perhaps don't need it anymore. Right?
You can see the face, but you can't put the name to it yet.
Yeah. And then it comes to you later and you think, oh, there it is.
Yes.
And now the person's not in front of you anymore. Those are normal age-related changes that we'll all experience. When somebody's memory starts to be affected in a way that it starts to create difficulties with everyday functioning, that would become a warning sign or a potential to have looked into. You shouldn't be able to forget the names of your children. Those should come fairly quickly, or the name of your spouse, right? If you haven't seen someone in 20 years and you run into them and the name isn't coming to you, that's a normal part of aging. But if you ran into somebody you know quite well and you see on a regular basis and the name isn't, you don't know the name, that might be a warning sign.
Is this one of the famous 10 risks, knowing that dementia is setting in? Yeah,
so there are some warning signs that we have for dementia. And the good thing about it is memory loss is on the list, but it certainly isn't the only thing on the list.
Okay.
So usually you wouldn't be concerned unless you had some combination of the warning signs. And those warning signs are changes in someone's memory, but also changes in their judgment and reasoning. So decision making is really changing. They might be making some really poor decisions. Their mood and their behavior and their personality are showing some fairly significant change. So they're not mood regulating well. They're doing things very out of character for their personality. They're having difficulty with everyday tasks, things they did easy.
Yeah. Can I interrupt just briefly on one of those?
Yeah.
The mood change element. It's something that happens to all of us. You know, you wake up and you're grouchy. You have a bad day.
Yeah.
Is it a matter of consistency? If this happens a lot,
yeah,
it's normal to happen once in a while.
Yeah, it's the swing. So, you may wake up on a day where you've got aches and pains, you got a migraine, maybe a headache, you're under the weather, or cold or something, you don't feel well. Sure, that's not going to be a great day for you. But you probably aren't during that day laughing hysterically, half an hour ago and crying heavily, an hour later or half an hour later. Like, your moods don't tend to swing that fast. So a warning sign for dementia is this dysregulation of mood. So the inability to really control your moods. And so you'd see a lot of swings. So the person's laughing one minute, they might experience something really frustrating and become very angry or upset very quickly. So it's this change in mood regulation that you would be looking for.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
And if there would be other elements as well in this, as these are just samples of the kind of thing we should be doing, and if it's consistent and if it occurs over a longer period of time, then we have to start being concerned.
A one-off, you might think, okay, that was just today, and maybe there was lots of reasons for it, but if that starts to happen kind of consistently, routinely, then that would be a warning sign. So when we talk about the warning signs, it's a combination of them. So if we saw someone having difficulty with memory, they were also having difficulty with mood regulation. They were also finding tasks that they normally did very well. So I'll give you an example, like if you've been making eggs for 40 years, 2 times a week, and you go to make those eggs and you can't remember how to make them, that would be a warning sign.
That's a serious sign.
That would be a really big warning sign. Whereas if you're trying to make Eggs Benedict and you've never made Eggs Benedict and you're making it for the first time, yes, as you get older, you may have to look at the recipe, and maybe when you were younger, you read the whole recipe and you went and did it. Now, you go and you read the first 3 steps. You do it. You come back and you read the next 3 steps. That's a normal part of aging. But if you've been making scrambled eggs for 40 years and you suddenly don't know how to make those scrambled eggs, that's the kind of differences that would indicate something is off.
So in a family or in a living situation, who's the first person to take some action on this generally, in your experience? Is it the spouse obviously is going to be concerned? Mm-hmm. Does the individual himself or herself have responsibility to do something? Who starts the process by which you become diagnosed or it's decided that you do in fact have incipient dementia, if not full-blown dementia?
Yeah, so oftentimes it is the people closest around the individual who will notice the changes and have some concern. So often it's a spouse if they have a partner, but it could be adult children sometimes that might notice, the person's children, or young age onset is something that happens. Dementia, these diseases under the heading of dementia don't just happen to people over 65. They can happen to young people. The youngest person I met living with dementia was 32 at time of diagnosis. So it can be very young, and for that individual, probably friends, close friends, might have been the first people to notice. So it really depends on the person's situation. Sometimes a person living with dementia in early stages will recognize that they have changes occurring and will seek out some investigation into that. But quite often, the person is unaware of the changes they are experiencing. We call that anosognosia. So it's actually a condition of the disease that they don't recognize their own changes. And so it's the people around them that are noticing.
So living alone is an extra risk, isn't it? If you don't have contact with other people. So what's the first step someone takes? The spouse notices, the adult children notice, someone notices. What's the first step they take?
So usually it would be trip to physician, family physician, a general practitioner, because to come up with a formal diagnosis of dementia, one of these diseases that's progressive and irreversible, They rule out other potential reasons that someone might have the symptoms. So for example, I might have poor memory, but be okay otherwise, and I might have a low B12. So I might have a vitamin deficiency, and it could be affecting my short-term memory.
Isn't that interesting?
So the first thing they would do is they would test, and usually it's through blood and urine. They'll test what could be causing those symptoms and rule them out first before they'll move on to investigating. So if everything comes back okay, then they're going to start looking and investigating further to figure out if this person has, Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia or, one of these diseases under the heading. There's 100 different causes for dementia symptoms.
Wow. To try and find all of them and identify them must be a huge, huge task.
Exactly, yeah. So they rule out first in case there's something that can be, that's causing the symptoms that, could be severe depression, or it could be a vitamin deficiency, or it could be electrolytes are off. So they look for all that stuff first. So it's a ruling out process to get a diagnosis of one of these irreversible brain diseases.
Well, so in other words, it would also be a mistake to jump immediately to a diagnosis of dementia, that there could be other causes that can be modified by medication or by improving diet and so on.
Absolutely.
That's really significant.
Yeah.
So then are there things that we can do if we suspect that we are becoming, if any one of us personally suspects that we might be having signs, what can you do to reduce the risk? How do you improve your situation?
So there's some modifiable risk factors and there's some not modifiable risk factors. So we're all going to age, and so that is part of life. We're all going to age. So unfortunately, advanced age is a risk factor, and that's going to happen to all of us if we're lucky enough to age. And then there's genetics, and that's really the unmodifiable risk factors because you inherit the genes you inherit. But that being said, there's tons of modifiable risk factors. So keeping your heart healthy, if you have heart disease, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, things like that affect your vascular system, that'll put you at higher risk. If you have diabetes, you really want to manage those numbers. You want to keep your numbers within control because those higher blood sugars will put you at higher risk for dementia. Head injury, you want to protect the head. I tell people, if you're going to be out on a bike, a helmet. If you're going to be walking in poor weather with icy conditions, really good grips on the shoes. We're trying to protect the head. You've probably heard NFL players and soccer players, they get a high risk of dementia because head trauma. So we want to keep the head healthy. And we want to exercise our brain. I don't know if people know they can exercise their brain.
I'm going to come to that, if I may. We're going to take a break here in a second or two, because all these things you've identified now are basically physical things, medically operated and medically rather influenced items that we can control with help from a professional. But there are things that you can do for yourself with your mental alertness. And we're going to go for a break now. When we come back from the break, can we talk about a few of those, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Daniel Farrell is our guest of the Alzheimer's Society of Peel, and you've been very helpful. Thank you. We'll take a break. Okay, I think the camera's on.
Oh, hi there. I'm Mark Grice, the artist, and I'm just preparing another canvas with a sketch on it that I'm going to paint for you in my show called Mark Grice, the Artist. I start out with a photograph in my hand, and in 1 hour I complete a painting right before your eyes. Now I got to get back to work getting it sketched out on the canvas so you can watch the show right here on Rogers TV.
Welcome back. We are talking to Danielle Farrell from the Peel Alzheimer's Society, and you are the public education coordinator, and so far we've heard some very valuable things. We were talking before about preventing, not necessarily preventing, but keeping yourself as alert as possible so that you can hold off dementia. And you mentioned a lot of the things that were physical elements. You had to have your body checked for vitamin deficiency or other elements. But there's also the point of keeping your mind alive. And can you tell us some of those now, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that staying social, the more connected you are to other people, the better the brain is stimulated. And this is an easy thing to do. But we saw over COVID, when people were isolated, we saw a higher incident rate of cognitive decline in seniors. And it really told a story about how important the social connection is. Because when you're communicating with somebody else, you're listening to them, they're listening to you, you're forming an opinion, you're sharing an opinion. It's a much more active way for the brain to be. So you're keeping the brain more stimulated. Other things you can do to keep the brain stimulated are, things that create challenge for the brain. Anything new, absolutely anything new that you give your brain to work on is great for the brain. So for instance, if you were going to read about something you know nothing about, because now you're taking in new information and the brain is working with that new information, right? So you're creating new neural synapses, you're creating more neural connection. When you listen to music, I don't know if people realize this, but it doesn't matter the type, so it doesn't have to be jazz or classical, it's whatever you like. When you are listening to music, 15 different parts of your brain are being stimulated at the same time. So they're all firing off. And so just having music on in your car while you're doing the dishes, while you're doing everyday things, just having music on of any type you like is giving the brain some stimulation. So that's an easy fix. If you go for a walk every evening, for example, walk in different neighborhoods, take different routes, go different ways, because when your brain is taking in new scenes and it's new information, it's not on autopilot, it's being activated, right? So that's what we want. We want an active brain. We want to give it things to do. And that could be crosswords, jigsaw puzzles, I do Wordle every morning, right? And so you just find ways to challenge the brain.
That's wonderful. And I'm going to emphasize one of the phrases you use, so that you're not on autopilot. And just everything you do should try and be a little different each day, even if it's minor. Don't sit in the same chair to read every time, things like that.
Yeah,
Yes.
Even if, and people will laugh at this, I guess, but even if you're right-handed and you brush your teeth always with your dominant hand, which most of us would do, try switching to the non-dominant hand, and now try brushing your teeth. Again, the brain has gone out of that autopilot setting, and it has to at least do a little thinking.
It's encouraging to know that there are so many things that you can actually do without professional help. These are all things that you can do on your own, isn't it?
Absolutely. We have control over diet. We have control over exercise. Things that are good for the body are generally good for the brain. So if you think about aerobic exercise, you think about raising your heart rate, you got a healthy heart, you have a healthier brain.
Right.
So those are things we have control over.
Wow, that's really useful. Let's take on a more, I can't say it more serious, but let's take on the reality that someone with dementia does eventually achieve a stage where support is needed, either support from the family or support from elsewhere. That person or that family calls the Alzheimer's of Peel. What's the first thing you can offer them?
Okay, so people come to the Alzheimer's Society Peel at all different stages of where they're at in their disease and what kind of supports they're requiring. But luckily, there is a whole host of free services for people living with dementia. So one would be family education. The support people around the individual are going to need to understand why the person's changing, what is occurring for them, and what kind of plans, what kind of things, like maybe banking and financial planning, what sort of things need to be in place. So some education for the families. There's support groups for the families. Those are free. There's also support groups for the person living with dementia. So there's groups just meant for them. There's also educational groups meant for just the person living with dementia, right? To get the information about what this is going to look like for them and to get their questions answered. So we have both streams, education for both. And then there is counseling. We have counseling, free counseling. So we have a whole counseling team. And we also have care navigators. And the care navigators will help families to know all the different services and how to navigate them, because just knowing about them is not the same as knowing how to access them and to get that support started. So there's also care navigation.
Can we pursue that one just a little bit?
Yeah.
You have a care navigator comes to your home. What kinds of things do they take you through?
So the care navigator and the support could definitely be in person, but it could also be sometimes, especially for adult children, it might be over the phone or over back and forth over email. Just depends on what they prefer, it's preference. But what they would do is they would assess, like speak to the person and their family about what their needs currently are. What are you struggling with? What are the things you might need? And then helping them know these are the resources. This is how you access them. And they'll help even with referral forms and things of that nature to get those services in place. Those could be respite services. A lot of times people living with dementia, as their disease progresses, their needs become quite a bit higher. And the care partners, meaning the families, can burn out. There can be burnout. And so respite becomes a needed and necessary kind of service. And so there's adult day programs in the region of Peel. 5 of them are run by the Alzheimer's Society of Peel itself, but there's others run by the region and stuff of that nature. And that can give the families a break, but it also gives the person living with dementia a place to go to stay stimulated. Where they do exercise program, where they have lunch together, so now they're being social. So to help kind of slow that progression and to keep the person, using their abilities as much as possible.
That's encouraging. It's encouraging to know that. Another issue that relates to this is the family makes a decision that we now can't really deal with this anymore, and we will have to find a residence. We'll have to find a place for our family member who has dementia to stay, to live. And you have, first of all, the task of finding a place, which I assume you'll be very instrumental in your society in helping provide that information. All right, am I correct?
Yeah, so the home and community care of each area across Ontario are the ones that do the assessment for long-term care and the paperwork for long-term care. But the care navigators can certainly help families to understand what is the difference between assisted living in maybe a retirement home setting, what is long-term care, like what are the differences, how do you get on the wait list for one of those. So that information the care navigators can provide, yeah.
Is there a legal element involved with that? If the family can no longer cope with the individual, but the individual just simply won't go, is there a legal element involved there? I mean, it almost takes a matter of force, isn't it?
So what will happen is if there is a care coordinator with the home and community care, so it's a different agency from us, they will do the assessment for long-term care. And if they deem that the person living with dementia is not capable to make their own long-term care decision, so if they feel the person is at risk and their care needs have surpassed what could be, provided in the community, and they do need long-term care, then that care coordinator can make that decision and have the family as power of attorney for care or substitute decision maker sign the paperwork for long-term care. So that's how it works.
Can I ask one question that relates to that? That power of attorney would have to be completed and established ideally before the individual, before you have to use it.
Ideally, people do set up powers of attorney for care as much as powers of attorney for property, because it's actually just as important. But some don't, and if somebody does not, what happens is it goes to substitute decision making. So the public guardian and trustee has laid out a hierarchy of, if somebody did not name a power of attorney for care, there's a hierarchy of who will then be able to make decisions on that person's behalf if they should become incapable of decision making. So it first goes to spouse or partner, then it goes to a living parent if there's a living parent. No living parent, it goes to a child that's 18 years or older, and so on. So they have a whole little hierarchy of who will make the decisions.
It is complex, and you can guide, your society will guide the family through this.
Absolutely,
It's so assuring to know that there's some help there, that there's someone who will help you through this situation. You're not alone, in other words.
Absolutely not alone. This is a very long journey. A lot of people living with one of these diseases, neurodegenerative diseases, will have it for an average of 8 to 12 years. That's a long time.
You bet.
And that means that there's lots of little transition points, along the journey. And families will find that difficult to navigate, but they do not need to do it alone.
There's also a matter of guilt, too, that, I think we all have a story about someone we know and love who's had to be put in well, I hate to use the term put in, but given a new home, and the family is guilty about having to do that. Do your counselors help them with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it is a big factor. I myself have a parent living in long-term care. So my dad is living in long-term care, and he is a person living with dementia. And he lived in the community for 7 years post-diagnosis, but then he's been in long-term care for the last 6.5 years. So it was a tough decision, but care needs began to surpass, what could be managed, really.
It's something you simply have to do.
Yeah.
Yes.
And, you can feel guilty about it, but I always say to families, did you cause this disease?
Yes.
And the answer is no. And would you have ever wished this on the person? And of course the answer is no. And so we're dealing with what is, and that's
a very valuable piece of advice on which to end. Thank you. Danielle Farrell is the Public Education Coordinator of Peel Alzheimer's Society, and you've been a very helpful guest. Thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. Please tune in to additional age-friendly Caledon Conversation segments airing on Rogers TV and later on YouTube. There will be some information coming on your screen if it's not there already. For more on what these conversations are about, and particularly this one, you can go directly to the website at www.caledon.ca/adult55. You can phone Caledon's 311, or you can email adult55@caledon.ca. And by the way, there is an e-newsletter available from Age Friendly Caledon that's very, very useful and helpful.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.